Hello. So today we're going to talk about I can I can barely get the word out. We're going to talk about vaginas.
Vagina.
Vaginas and menopause. See, I can barely get the word out and that shouldn't be. And that's my whole point. Um what do you think about when you think about vaginas and menopause? Um I didn't think of anything. I didn't link the two. My image of menopause it's pretty much summed up by this picture. Pretty much the first image that I got when I Googled menopause was a picture of this woman, and it's almost always the same. They're almost always usually white people, clearly middle class, and the women have been desexualized. They always look uncomfortable and sad. And in this case, you see that she has a fan because she's obviously miserable from the this hot sweats, which everybody knows. At least I knew, and pretty much that's the biggest image of menopause is hot flashes. So you can see that this woman is horribly uncomfortable. She's, her mouth has like almost like frown lines, and she has. But the other thing is that she's kind of desexualized. So she's wearing very, almost like if you wanted to make clothes bland and unsexual, that's asexual. That's what you would wear. You would wear, a beige plain sweater. And like with very little color in it, and very little makeup, and I mean that's the subtext, is that the woman is not really sexual anymore. She's kind of miserable, and is past sexual attractiveness. Not just bisexual. It's not even just sexual attractiveness. It's also sexuality. It's really the subtext everywhere. For instance, I remember this was very common. I remember going into a preschool when my kids were smaller, and the preschool had a very large lobby of. This story has a point. It had a very large lobby, and it was featuring an artist, and it was very, very colorful. It was a large preschool with a lot of classes, so it had a pretty big lobby, and in the lobby were very vivid, colorful pictures of what looked like flowers, maybe 25 paintings, and it was featuring an artist. And then as I looked at it more, I realized that they weren't flowers; they were actually vaginas. All of it, which is kind of funny when you think about it. I mean, it's a preschool, but I guess whatever. But I couldn't help saying to the receptionist, who was this kind of young woman in her early 20s, I'm like, these pictures are all like vaginas. And she was like, it can't be vaginas because the artist is like in her 60s. So that's the point. The artist was in her 60s. So I guess her vagina just withered up, fell off. It was gone. And she not only had no more vagina, it just withered up, dried out, and fell off, but she couldn't even paint vaginas. It's like just recently, actually, I was commenting to a colleague. There was a new colleague, and who seemed interested in another woman, and I mentioned to this colleague that he was hot. Maybe I shouldn't have, I don't know, but I mentioned to him that he was pretty good looking. And she looked at me really strangely. She's like, well, I mean, how would you know? And I didn't even know what she meant at first. And then I realized she actually even said it. She was like, well, you're old. So I was like, I have eyes. Like, what? I can't see whether a man is attractive anymore. I can't tell, I guess, because I'm old and my vagina has withered off. So Um, there's there's that I wanted to talk about because going into menopause, there was like very, very little that there was very, very little that I knew, and it's combined ignorance and fear that made it's so unnecessary. It's really unnecessary, and what I'd like to do in today is just talk about the basics, and that's why I want to start with vaginas because that was the source of my biggest piece of misinformation and kind of my biggest fear in a subtextual way. So that's what I'd like to start with today, and then go on to other things about menopause. Menopause is presented as something completely normal. They even say that outright. It's a normal condition that all women experience, and in which we supposedly pretend that it's just normal. And then at the same time, it's also a condition that is feared, not only on minor levels like embarrassing hot flashes. That was, like I mentioned, that's the thing that I heard the most about, and it was always done in a way that emphasized both that the woman's body was out of control and liable to embarrass her at any moment, usually the most embarrassing moments. And the women were also presented as semi kind of insane. So just to give a few examples, I'd heard so many stories of hot flashes from women who were presenting at conferences, and one of my best friends that happened to, and she was wearing a business suit, and then all of a sudden she was overcome with a hot flash and her entire suit was drenched, like the armpits. Horribly embarrassing. I mean, she was like in front of the committee, and she had to excuse herself because it drenched right through and it was very obvious. That reminds me of, it ties into our bodies being out of control going into puberty, and the fears associated with that. So that there was always the fear of, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. When I was 11 or so, I was reading that book because I was excited about my period. But there was an idea that your body could also betray you, while we were told it was a beautiful thing and flowers were presented on top of pads and, it was all flowery and pink and beautiful. At the same time, I will never forget we had the talk. And in the talk, which we looked forward to for like a year, I will never forget, the nurse gives us the talk and tells us, basically instills fear in us that we have to wear pads. And at the time, they were really... I actually can't remember. I don't think I had the belt. I think I was past that. I think I had the peeling adhesive like we do now. But they were much bulkier than now. So they were like wearing a wadded up diaper. They were really quite uncomfortable. But anyway, she said, you have to do it. You have to wear it and don't ever be caught not wearing it. One time she said she was waiting. I'll never forget the story. She was waiting in the train station and she was wearing white. How dare she wear white? How dare she? When she had her period. Obviously, she was asking for punishment from the gods. Clearly. So she was wearing white and she was waiting at the train station for the train and she bled through and the white appeared all the way up and she was horribly embarrassed and horribly humiliated. And all the girls, I'm sure, we all were probably listening to this appalled and afraid and terrified of, could that happen to us? And indeed, it did happen to me. A few years later, I actually was wearing a white bikini. Again, how dare I? And had my period. And at that time, I was at the beach. And at that time, I don't know how it is now. I was like 15. You didn't wear, the idea was you couldn't wear tampons because if you were a virgin, it was bad for you somehow. Stupid idea. And so I was wearing a pad, and I had cramps, and I was lying on the sand, and the sun was nice and hot. I felt better because I was just crampy, and felt good to lie on my stomach and have the warm sun on my back and the sound of the ocean. So you'd think that I would be nice and relaxed, but as it is with pads, they shift. And so sure enough, I'm lying there, and this man and woman walk by, boyfriend and girlfriend, they're arm in arm, and the man smirks at me, unmistakably smirks at me, and I'm looking at him like, what? Like, what? And he walks by, and the woman looks at him and smirks too, and then she looks at me and kind of gives me this kind of sad look, and I was like, what? What? So I guess about 20 minutes later, I didn't know what that was about, and then I did, because I got up, and 20 minutes later I had blood all like my entire back of my bikini was blood. It was horribly embarrassing, horribly mortifying. The only thing that comforted me at the time was that those people were total strangers, but horrible. And in the same way, just as you enter puberty and you feel like your body's out of control and it's liable to set you up for countless embarrassments, so is menopause, where you feel that with the hot flashes, you feel, and it's treated in the same way. It's treated as if, la la la, this can happen, and you can be horribly embarrassed at a meeting and be covered in schmutz and sweat, totally covered. Or you can be treated kind of like a half lunatic, which happens a lot. Stories about moms standing in front of the refrigerator because they're so miserable, or the air conditioning is going on, is on, and everyone's miserable in the house because it's like 50 degrees outside and there's no reason the air conditioner should be on, but mom insists. Ha ha ha, lunatic mom. And then I remember a teacher, obviously through menopause, and she let her windows open in the classroom all winter. And it was like the snow would be falling and she'd have the windows wide open. We would all be huddled in our coats. And it was like a running joke. We were all like, we basically made fun of her for being like pretty much a lunatic. And so there's that idea that the body's going to betray us like it betrayed us before. And it's going to make us liable for all sorts of embarrassments. What can be done about it? Well, it used to be that the idea was that you would take estrogen, oral estrogen, and everything would be fine. And then it came out that no, that was really bad for you and could give you cancer. And so what do you do? And they're really, I guess you use a fan. That's the solution, and look miserable. Even though we're told this is a normal condition. And at the same time, that it's supposed to be a normal condition, we ignore all the things that are clearly wrong. So, just to seg you back into sexuality, I was struck when I went out with a bunch of girlfriends. We saw, I'm totally blanking out on the name of the movie, but it was with Jane Fonda and Candice Bergen and Mary Steenburgen and Diane Keaton. And they're all great actresses, and they all look great. They're all older than me. I'm 56. They're all older than me. And Jane Fonda was like in her 80s, okay? All of them are postmenopausal. Not once in the entire movie was there even a hint that any of them experienced any postmenopausal symptoms. None. They weren't taking any medication, and they were having sex whenever they felt like it. And Jane Fonda's character is in her 80s, and she's basically having sex. I mean, God bless her, but she's basically having sex like a 15-year-old. There's no acknowledgement that anything can happen. There was any sort of symptoms sexually. And there is an acknowledgement for men. So one of the plot points was that one of the woman's husbands had erectile dysfunction and was very embarrassed, age-related erectile dysfunction, and was embarrassed about it. And in the marriage, they didn't know how to handle it, and she addressed it poor. He didn't bring it up, and she addressed it poorly, and kind of spiked his drink. And and he felt violated, and she apologized. But my point is, it was talked about, whereas, and it certainly is talked about in tons of commercials. It's kind of talked about openly, but for women, no. So we have, on the one hand, we have menopause, and we have people becoming asexual, and vaginas falling off, and they have embarrassing hot flashes, and they lose their sexuality and dress really plain with no makeup, and have other symptoms like mood swings and unable to sleep, and weight gain to the point that you look like really ugly because your weight gain is like not flattering. It's not curvy weight gain. It's like gut weight gain. And your hair falls off, and all those negative things. And on the other hand, we're supposed to believe that it doesn't affect us at all, and we should just take natural things, like we should, exercise, which actually is something that has helped me. In all honesty, exercise does help, and I'm not crazy about it, like 3 or 4 times a week. But both of those reactions, that menopause is something like normal that happens to all of us. Well, so is death. So there's that. But there's that, and on the other side, it's debilitating, and we lose our sexuality. And so it's very confusing. There's very little spoken about. When it is spoken about, it's kind of treated as a joke. The woman it's kind of whatever. It's very, very embarrassing. So when I was entering menopause, for me, I consider myself a pretty educated person. I really do. I hope I don't flatter myself, but I was kind of dreading menopause because I was afraid of the vagina falling off part. And I was afraid of hot flashes. I was afraid of embarrassing myself. The other symptoms I didn't really know much about. I was mildly afraid of mood swings. And I didn't really know what to do. No one ever talked about it. I went to the doctor every year. It was never brought up. The only thing that was ever asked was, are you still menstruating? But then one time when I said, I don't think I'm not menstruating, I haven't in a year, the only response was, yeah, so you're probably menopause. So there was no conversation about it. And I don't want to sit there and cast blame. I don't want to say, and who knows how representational my own doctor was. I am just saying that in the popular culture, at least as far as I've experienced it, you have to be very, very proactive. You don't, it's not like, and I don't even know, I'm not a guy, but I would think that as guys get older, one of the conversations that might happen is the doctor will say, do you have any erectile issues? I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it is a general thing that happens as men get older, and it is something that concerns them a lot, so you would think that a doctor would mention it. But it's not, that never happened in any of, gynecologists, general doctors, never. And it doesn't seem, and again, it doesn't happen. So this is why I'm doing this, because, I think it's time. Such was my ignorance that I didn't even know the symptoms as they were happening. So my first symptom that I got was dryness. And it wasn't that bad. It was mildly dry. But it kind of, it was mildly uncomfortable. And it started out gradually. And I thought, it's all right. But tied with that, all of a sudden, I started having complete incontinence. Like, I would pee in my pants in the most horribly embarrassing ways. And again, here was my body betraying me. And I'm a teacher, so you can imagine how it felt when several times this happened to me. Like, I'm up and down a lot. And I would sometimes, like, if I, had to either raise my voice or move around abruptly or even just stood there, I would pee. And if I forgot to wear appropriate clothes, appropriate meaning it's the same exact thing of when you were a little girl and you were a young girl, not a little girl, and starting your period, you would have to think about what you wore. Like you didn't want to wear tight pants that were light in color. And it was the same thing. I was like re-entering my early teen years was pretty horrible, and I would pee. And there was one time where I had to lie to my students and just say I spilled, stupid lame lie, that I spilled coffee on my crotch. One time I had to go to the nurse and get a clean pair of pants. And I got so that I would actually keep a pair of pants in my car. But such was my, like, ignorance, was that it never occurred to me that this was tied to menopause. It didn't occur to me. I thought that it must be something else. So I thought maybe it was the caffeine. And when I went to the doctor and she said, yeah, maybe it's caffeine. Maybe you should try not having any caffeine. So I did. Now that is pretty much, that's a noble sacrifice because I need my coffee and I need my caffeine. So I did. And I did, I didn't have coffee, which was pretty horrible. And it helped a little bit, but then it gradually got worse and worse. And I had this what made me go to the doctor was this really mortifying experience. I was at a cruise ship and they have these games, it was like a treasure hunt game, and I'm sitting down, I'm next to all these strangers, and you're going up and down, you have to find like this purse with this and this color lipstick and all this stuff. And I just by this point, it's not even volition, it's not an act of volition, it just comes out. It just pours out. Only it's urine, so it really, really smells. And it's very pungent. It's horrible. So I'm sitting there and I am sitting in pee. I didn't even notice it at first because it just poured out and I was all interested in what was going on. And then I'm noticing that I'm sitting, I actually noticed from the smell. And what would you do? Test. Tick, tick, tick. What would you do? You're sitting there and you're in a puddle of your urine and all these strangers all over the place and you start to smell the urine fumes and you have nothing. What did I do? I was lucky in that I happened to be wearing a sweatshirt because it was cool. So I took the sweatshirt, I put it around my waist, and as I'm like getting up, I'm like, thank God the seat was vinyl. I like rubbed the the sweatshirt on the urine and I just left. I was so embarrassed. And there was a guy next to me. He was like staring at me. He kept on like it was so horrible. And I even started to think, should I wear diapers? Like, is that what I'm supposed to do? And I actually did. No, I did wear diapers. Not the diapers for those pads. They don't help. Like, you pee in them and then you smell of urine. Like, so awful. Then the infections started. And I haven't had bladder or urinary infections in a really long time. And they started. And I went to the doctor for that. And again, there was no discussion about anything being tied to menopause. She just treated me for the infection. She ran a urinary test, and I had an infection. And she gave me antibiotics, and I took them. And it didn't really go away. So I had to go back. And basically, I had to take antibiotics for a really long time, like 3 weeks or something. But there was never a discussion as far as could that be tied to menopause. Yes. And so the thing that made me finally look up menopause was the dryness. Like it started to get really bad, and it started to be painful. Like, I'm not talking about like just painful, like you're walking around and it's like it hurts, and sometimes you get like these sharp pains, like kind of like little knives. And I was like, this isn't really cool. And once I started to aggressively look up stuff, I would look up the dryness, and then I saw the tie between menopause, bladder or urinary tract infections, dryness, and incontinence that I didn't know existed. So knowledge is power. So once I knew that, then I could really go to the next level with preventatives.
JJ, vagina word, snitchy or snooky or cookie or something, the JJ, vagina.
So I Googled it, the power of Google, and I found it's called vaginal atrophy, which kind of sounds like your vagina's withering and falling off. Like I'd feared. I mean, it sounds like your vagina falls off. It's atrophic or becomes deformed or something. I actually have no idea what it looks like inside. Maybe it does look weird. But the point is, what happens when you have lower estrogen is that your blood flow is decreased, and your tissues, you lose tissues, and sometimes you actually lose the entire first top layer. So the vagina becomes much less elastic, and the whole first layer of cells can disappear, and leaving the vagina very prone to tearing. It becomes very thin and elastic, and sex feels like knives. I mean, like blades. It's not even a question of like it's hard. It's incredibly painful. So it even hurt. The first time I experienced it was actually during a pap smear, and the speculum killed. It was like, what the heck? And the woman was like really cheerful about it. She's like, oh yeah, that's menopause. I'm like since I didn't even know that. I didn't know. So so the pH level of the vagina also increases, so it becomes less acidic, and that means that the bacterial infections and yeast infections become much more common because they grow more in that climate of less acidity. And so you, because of all that, you are, it happens in technically about 50% of are reported. If I had to guess, I would guess that there's a lot more unreported. Simply because of a lot of reasons. Shame, a feeling that this is natural, so we're all supposed to have painful sex and kind of not want to have sex anymore. That our vaginas wither and fall off. When I say it's not talked about, I don't mean simply, I should clarify, I don't mean simply that it's not talked about with your doctor, but it's just not talked about. Like, at least as far as I know, it's the only time it's ever been talked about is when I raise it with my friends. Like, I bring it up, and then people respond. And from that, I've learned that most women are bothered by it, and some women are not. And one of my friends who's 10 years older than me said that she had it, and then as menopause went on, the symptoms abated. And I don't know if that's true for people in general, but that was good for me to know. I know that my other symptoms of menopause have abated. Like, I don't get, knock on wood, I should knock on wood, I don't get any hot flashes anymore. I didn't really have a whole lot, thankfully, to begin with, but definitely my symptoms have abated. I sleep better than I did before. So maybe that'll be true of me as well. But even if that's true, even if it naturally abates, you're still talking about 5 or 10 years of incredible discomfort, and life is short. So there are several ways of treating it. That of vaginal atrophy. And that is going to be my next discussion, because it was quite a journey figuring out what was going to be my next step. But I hope that everybody feels free to talk about this and to be open about our bodies without feeling either shame or denial, and also be proactive in finding and if appropriate, demanding safe treatments and for symptoms, and also knowing that they're part of a gestalt of the under the umbrella of menopause, as opposed to piecemeal, as happened to me, oh, here's ADHD medication because your memory is not as good right now, so here's ADHD medication, which literally happened to me. Or here we're going to test you for a bladder infection because maybe you're wearing the wrong kind of panties. And, very, very piecemeal. And instead, let's look at it under the gestalt of this is a major change in our life, and we should embrace it and acknowledge those changes, but without letting it overcome us, and just be open about it.